research that shows that we've created habits around not leaving our couches, and that we actually have to actively force ourselves to redevelop the habit of socializing because we've gotten so comfortable watching Netflix and avoiding people. So thank you for being sort of pioneers in terms of bringing back community into the school and onto campus. Historically, there have been about, 75 to 100 people in years that we've done this in the past before the pandemic. So that's our goal, is to get back to those numbers and back to a more robust feeling. But I'm grateful for you to be an audience for my remarks. I've been really thinking a lot. It was a great opportunity to reflect. We're not post-pandemic, but we're post-pandemic crisis, and I've had a lot of thoughts floating around in my head for the last couple of years, and it was a really just beneficial to sit down and really think about, like, now that we're sort of on the other side of this, what does that mean? What do I think about education after being involved in it for over 30 years? What do I want my legacy to be, and what do I want to contribute as I move into a new phase of my life in my, God, I can't believe I have to say this, mid-50s, and my child is going to college, and so, it's just been a time for reflection. So anyway, with all that, I'd love for us to just start. I've been finding a lot of solace and comfort and inspiration in poetry, and I thought we would just start by settling in and just listening closely and grounding through. I'll read a poem by Rumi called The Guest House, and just a chance to kind of leave the day behind and all come into the room. So this is a beautiful poem that I love. This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep out your house, empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So thank you for listening. I thought that set the tone around just openness, open to all experiences, and seeing them as opportunities for some new delights, quite possibly. So before I really embark on my remarks, I just want to say a few words about the Board of Trustees. It's customary just to have an opportunity to let parents know a little bit more about the board, what the board does, and just briefly and in a nutshell, the board is the guardian of the school's mission, and they strategize and plan at a very high level. We're lucky to have a board that's composed of dedicated, talented current parents. We have alumni parents. We have an alum student. We have grandparent who is both an alumnus grandparent and also a current grandparent. We have a professional educator, which we've wanted for a long time on the board. We found just the right person, and lots of different backgrounds, different professions, different interests and age groups, and so I love working with this board. The board's known in the region for being a very high level, high performing, excellent board that other often invited to speak about governance and is looked to by other boards for inspiration and guidance. So I just want to, if you're a board member, can you just raise your hand or stand up? I just want to thank you for your time. These are volunteer positions. They are time and talent of these amazing people, some of whom have been on the board for decades. So thank you. And with that, I want to invite Sam Widows up to say a few words. Sam is vice president of the board. He is an alumnus of Turning Point. He is a brand new parent of Wesley, who's 6 months old, who I just got to meet tonight. So he is a new parent himself. So anyway, Sam, I'm going to turn it over for you to say a few words.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you all. A lot of that. My name is Sam Widows. I'm the vice president of the board, and the board chair, Robert Friedman, couldn't make it tonight, and generally he's the one who introduces the board and explains a little bit about what we do. I guess, as Laura said, generally, we are the stewards of this institution, and we ensure the financial well-being of this nonprofit organization, setting the budget, overseeing the investment portfolio and the endowments, setting the mission of the school, establishing long-range plans that align with that mission, and then also we listen to, we advise, and we support the head of school, Dr. Koenigsberg. But with that said, I thought it might be useful for me to share why I do this work as a trustee, because I do not have a child at Turning Point, and I have answered more than a few questions about why I spend Friday mornings every other month at meetings at my old elementary school. 7 years ago, I was asked to be the first alumni board member by Deborah Richmond, who was the head of school when I was a student, back when the school was located in the Sepulveda Pass by the Getty Center. At the time, I was honored and had really fond memories of Turning Point. But I was also just starting my career as a lawyer and was very far from having a school-aged child. So really, I just thought it would be a cool addition to my resume. But it turned out that my first board meeting was also the first board meeting of Dr. Koenigsberg. I'm going to call you Laura. That's what sorry. Yeah. Who was the new head of school, and she was very... she was incredibly friendly and clearly brilliant, but what I had no idea was that by attending those board meetings, I was also attending a master class in leadership. Right away, Laura established that she had a real vision for this school, an exceptional academic institution where diversity, equity, and inclusion were baked into every facet of the program, and that the community as a whole was driven by a sense of belonging. She said that from day one, and I knew it was the school that I went to was in great hands. She also had the wisdom to deeply look into what made this place great for 50 years. She found that it was not one thing, that we weren't the math school, the sports school, or the arts school. She actually uncovered an entire periodic table of elements that made Turning Point what it is. All of which resonated perfectly with the school that I remembered going to. And finally, she had the resolve to navigate the school through the greatest crisis of my lifetime, a global pandemic that continues to disrupt our lives and affect our general anxieties. It's her guidance and the incredible diligence of her staff and all the teachers that have made this school the shining example of how to weather a storm through through a storm of unimaginable magnitude. And now Laura has been rightfully recognized as a leader among her peers. She was appointed the board chair of the California Association of Independent Schools, and continues to inspire me and the rest of the board each time we meet with her vision, wisdom, and resolve. So that's why I do this work. Because, as she said, I did recently become a father and hope to see my son one day come to Turning Point, where she can look up to Laura, all the teachers that make this place so special. Thanks.
That was presentation over. So, thank you, Board of Trustees. We have some administrators and staff and faculty here tonight. So if you just want to stand up and just quickly say who you are for families who are new or who are in a different division, haven't met you yet. So just a quick, we'll just start over here with Julia. Courtney? Oh. Diana Bender. Thank you, Diana. And then over here, Aretta and Jenny. Jenny? Aaron? get. And Will. Great. Thank you. So, and we also have Brandy Ledford Davudian is the Parent Association President. So thank you for leading the parents back to campus and back into community, which I know is so important to you. All right, let's get going. So I want to start with this quote, "The life journey is not linear," by Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a poet and also a community organizer. What a time to be alive. Right now we are in a fast river together. Every day there are changes that seemed unimaginable until they occurred. So I'm sure many events come to mind as you consider this quote. It makes me think a little bit about white water rafting, right? When you're on the river and you think, oh, this is how I'm going to turn through the waves, and I've got it planned 3 kind of stages in advance. And but once you're in it, you have to address the river you're actually in, not the river that you thought you'd be in or that you were in upstream a little while back. You might want to plan ahead 3 steps, but you're always having to reevaluate. And I think this is the time that we're in. So, you know, both exciting, has its challenges, but, you know, that pit in your stomach could be anxiety or it could be excitement. I like to think it's exciting. So tonight's essential question is how we continue to build a learning environment in which children thrive. And we have many challenges. And I sort of joke that in years past, how do I get this out? In years past, we've talked a lot about preparing kids for a global economy or lots of different kind of experiences or interactions with different kinds of people. And then on the side, we've said there's so many challenges that that your children are going to inherit. And I think now that we've gone through the pandemic and racial reckoning, and it's a little harder to say that these are, sort of over here on the side because they are staring us in the face and they are unarguable. So here are some of the things that we want to be thinking about, right? We have mental health crises, socially, and certainly we're seeing bumps in the road as we come back with kids who haven't had a chance to socialize in the same way or learn those skills, who have maybe increased anxiety. I think as adults we have more anxiety. We have climate disruption and atmospheric rivers and cyclone bombs, which were terms I'd never heard before, like last week. But and then we tend to want to say like, oh, that's over, and now it's sunny again in California. But I think it's a little foreboding, not just a one-off. Future pandemics, hard to get our heads around that. Sort of feel like one and done, but we don't know what might be down the line for us. Poverty, food insecurity, other things revealed by the pandemic in these times, and even the future of democracy, right? So these are things that we want to be aware of, that we know will be issues that our children will grow up into, those worlds. But I think deeply essential and at the heart of what we also want to be thinking about when we're educating kids is what is the ancient enduring question about what does it mean to be human? And that's connected to who we are and who we are with each other. So just understanding some context for the way our brains work, right? That even in the best of times, our brains are vulnerable to stressors, and sometimes that affects. If you look at the triangle, it's a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where executive functioning is at the top. You need a lot of things in place to get to executive functioning. And you can see on the bottom of the chart things like pressure, poor sleep, illness, worries, poor nutrition, low mood, stress are going to pull us down from the top of the pyramid. And so things begin to go, right? If you don't have those things in place, even in the best of circumstances, executive functioning might suffer, attention regulation, working memory, et cetera. And so, of course, we also know that children's brains are still developing. And the science says that the prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of organizing, in charge of planning, of impulse control, of regulation, is not fully formed. Anticipating, decision-making, all those things. It's not fully formed until mid-20s, and so we're already scaffolding those skills for them. But you can see how there are factors that can take away from their ability to develop those qualities and skills. Okay. When we think about, but I will say, at Turning Point, that's what we're doing. We are scaffolding. We already know how to support kids as they grow and develop. So when we think about grief and anxiety, there's some reckonings, I guess, that we need to contend with, right? We have a sense of grief in these last few years around a loss of certainties, right? We used to think we could count on things, and now we know how precarious and fragile those things are. And that was always an illusion, but it was a compelling illusion. We felt like we could anticipate. We felt like, we wanted things to get back to normal, and we know that there's a new normal or whatever we want to call it, but sometimes we're powering through as though we can get back to normal. And I know that was a strategy I tried for a long time, and it just stopped working. And part of what I was contending with over the last few years was feeling like I usually just keep going. Like that's my, I just press the on button and keep going, and it's not working. I have to do something different. It's not working, my usual strategies. So this idea of powering through doesn't do us any good, and we have to stop and really think about what it is that we need in this new times. And a sense that we had control over the uncontrollable. Again, a defense mechanism, but not one but one that we have grief about. We had to give up some of these illusions. Anxiety. Anxiety is what we feel when something bad could happen. We're anxious when we want something, and in that way it's linked to hope, right? We're anxious because we want something to be a certain way. We hope it will be that way. We want it to be different from either the worst thing that we can imagine or from the way it is now. And so in that way, it's kind of it has a positive or useful function. We used to manage our anxiety in some ways through faith and faith institutions, through government, schools, right? Those were the places that were sturdy, that we could count on, that we believed in, and we've seen the unraveling of some of those institutions, and that has created more anxiety for us because we don't feel as much like we can count on, government or, our whatever our religious faith is. We're seeing some cracks in those fixtures. And again, those cracks were there, but we're seeing them or having to contend with them more. And it's creating more anxiety because we don't feel like we're supported in the same ways. And so when we feel that those institutions can't provide that security, it's hard for us. Okay. So fear in opposition to anxiety. Fear is what's happening, is when something bad is happening and we're afraid. Anxiety is when we are anticipating an uncertain future that might be bad. So if we're reframing anxiety, and I read this really interesting book, which I'm happy to share with you. It was about, understanding anxiety as a tool and not so much as a pathologizing it, but thinking about how we can leverage anxiety. That the problem isn't really anxiety, it's how we interact with anxiety. We can use anxiety as information. What is this anxiety telling me about what I want, what I hope for, what I'm worried about? And of course, thinking about this in relation to our children. Right? What is the experience, what do I hope for them, and how can I help them get to that outcome? Right? We also have anxiety about our parenting. I think when we, that sometimes is the first trigger for us when we're interacting with, a school, or our kid does something that we don't like or gets in trouble at school or whatever. It's, the anxiety of, am I a good parent? What does it mean to be a good parent? And what it means to be a good parent has to do also with what do you want for your child? What is the outcome that you're hoping for? And I don't know that we always think about that in the way that that question really requires. At least I know I probably don't do that enough as a parent. So interestingly, though, there is a connection between anxiety and creativity, because in imagining a different future, we are creating that future, right? So it helps us to see that there are possibilities that are different if we're able to expand, because anxiety can also make us more myopic and focused on the one right thing. And so we want to engage anxiety with curiosity, with energy, with openness, right? What is this telling me, and how can that lead to more possibilities instead of freezing up and shutting down? The good news is that children are anti-fragile, sort of by design. And the danger of keeping children insulated from ideas and the anxiety that ideas might cause can make things worse and can perpetuate the belief that difficult emotions harm us. I was we hosted a grandparents and grandfriends Zoom yesterday with a parent expert who happens to be a member of the community. And one of the things she shared with us is just the metaphor of the savior versus the cheerleader. And that when we are trying to save our children from hurt or disappointment or anxiety, that we give them the false message that they are not capable. But when we cheerlead and stand by the sidelines and help them and guide them, they do better. And that has to do with the sense of anti-fragility. That's how we develop resilience and confidence in children, is by letting them do that. I was talking to a parent, and her child cries when she comes to preschool every day, and for months. Can you remember, like maybe your kid cried for a week, and it was like, and this child comes and she does great every single day, but the message that mom is giving her is, I know you can do this. I know you can do this. You're going to have a great day. We're going to pick you up later. That is engendering a kind of anti-fragile, confidence in her child, and I think that's amazing. So when these anti-fragility develops from randomness, from volatility, from disorder, and it needs chaos to flourish. It's like our immune systems. It has to meet challenges to fortify itself. And so we need to develop our emotional immune systems and our children's emotional immune systems. And again, if we're thinking about anxiety not as a disabling feature, but something to explore, discuss, and struggle through, then it can be something really positive for our kids. And I don't know, how many of you ever read Going on a Bear Hunt? Do you know that book? Oh, you don't? If you don't know this book and you have young children, it's a wonderful book. It's beautifully illustrated by Helen Oxenberry. And anyway, it says they're going on a bear hunt, and they come up against different obstacles. And they say every time, you can't go over it. We can do this in chorus. Can't go under it. Can't go around it. Got to go through it. And here's a picture from the book. They're the children. They're in the woods. And you can see there's a parent sort of on the side who's guiding. He's the cheerleader from the side. He's guiding them through. He's there. But the children are making their way through the forest because there's no other way to go. So, we can't just put the blinders up. We need to lean in. So what's next? Right? The pandemic and racial reckoning prompted us to ask what is essential. And in that way, I think it was healthy, right? We peeled off a lot of layers of things that we realized were just not important, they weren't meaningful, they didn't have value to us. And so really, the giving of care was at the center of every decision I think we made. We made decisions to keep people safe. We made decisions that were in the best interest of family and loved ones. We reached out. We contributed to efforts, of first responders. It was all around giving of care. And the actively caring about each other means giving up ideas about certitude and conclusions, and requires us to think about new possibilities, which means we need to collaborate and work together. We need flexibility. We need consensus building. We have to listen actively with intention and curiosity. We have to hear each other. We have to all be in the room, and we have to all be humble and cultivate that attitude of humility that we don't know it all, that we're not necessarily at the center, that other people and other species and other organisms have things to offer, and systems have things to offer that might help us to move through a very complicated world. And the rejection of human exceptionalism. That, our brains are efficient, but they're flawed. We have flawed, beautiful, complicated, but flawed brains. So, I'm going to go back. We do know that we wouldn't exist without the countless generations of our ancestors whose care and survival, have led us to our existence right now. And we need each other in order to survive and to care for each other. I think we all have come to the understanding that we don't want to and can't replicate the problems of the past, and that we need new possibilities and new pathways. And we know also that social connections are essential to our health and our well-being and our purpose, because without them, I don't know if you've seen recent research that says that people who are lonely and don't have at least one important person, social connection in their lives, are more likely to die or develop, heart disease and other chronic illnesses, than even, other health-related issues. So loneliness actually leads to mortality over things like, obesity or diabetes or those kinds of chronic. So our mental health declines, our physical health declines when we're not connected. Okay. So Lynn Margulis is an American evolutionary biologist and the primary modern proponent for the significance of symbiosis in evolution. And symbiosis is just the phenomenon of co-evolution of two distinct species into a partnership-oriented evolutionary relationship. And this is really a challenge to competition as a kind of the neo-Darwinistic idea of evolutionary change, right? So it's the idea that organisms coexist and co-evolve together as opposed to in a strictly competitive sense. And she was doing this kind of groundbreaking work decades ago, but people didn't take her seriously in part because she was a female scientist, so there's always that piece of it that I think is interesting, but more and more people have come to accept her research as legitimate. She also said something really interesting about graduate students, which I loved. She said that when she looks for graduate students in her lab, she looks for students who have had some bumpy road somewhere. They've gotten into trouble, they've challenged authority. She said the compliant A+ students who just want to know what's on the test and do what the teacher wants is not, she never brings those people into her lab. So for those of you who have spunky or children, then there's a path forward for them. But it makes sense, right? And I think we're wanting and thinking about ways where we can challenge the paradigms that we have counted on for so long in ways that will make a better world. So anyway, the examples of some of these symbiotic systems include what you might have heard, the wood wide web. Have you heard about these relationships among trees? Oh, good, I'll talk a little bit about that. So this was another female scientist who also was not taken seriously for a long time, but Suzanne Simard was another scientist who proved, and I have Erin Miller here to back me up, or this is not my field. This is not my field, but I've been learning a lot about it. But she discovered that trees communicate with each other above the ground, but also through their roots. They share resources. So if a tree is dying, they might send their resources to help that tree. Or if there's a young seedling who's too shaded and can't get sunlight for photosynthesis, they will share some of their resources through underground roots with that tree. Or they communicate to say, oh, there's a predator, there are aphids, and so they send messages. So put up your protective, whatever trees do to protect themselves against aphids. So there's this network of altruistic partnerships among these trees, among these forest networks. And what they found even more recently is that mycelium, which are mushrooms and fungi, are part of this web, of this network, and which is just fascinating. So on the left is a mycelium network. It looks like a brain. It looks like neurons, right, or other interconnected cells. And then on the right is just, there's the mushrooms are, helping to deliver the mail among the roots of the trees, because what they discovered was that the fungi siphon food off of the trees. There's carbon-rich sugar that's produced during photosynthesis, and the plants obtain nutrients from the fungi that fungi have acquired from the soil and that trees cannot possess, and mushrooms have some special enzymes so that the plants can obtain phosphorus and nitrogen. So, okay, so there's this basic exchange of goods, right, between the plant and the fungi, and the network, this fungal network also allows the plants to redistribute these nutrients, as I was saying before, and without the fungi, they couldn't send the resources to each other. They couldn't warn each other. They wouldn't be able to help foster these younger plants, et cetera. So aside from being super fascinating, why is this important? Well, I think the revelation of this Wood Wide Web's existence raises really big questions. One, about where species begin and end, about whether a forest might be better imagined as a single superorganism rather than a grouping of distinct, independent, individualistic ones, and about what trading, sharing, or even friendship might mean among plants. And so, what can we learn from these relationships and this intelligence? Well, there's a connection between this and to anti-fragility and robustness. These cooperative ecosystems are stable because there are many redundancies and complexities as opposed to, say, monocultural farming. And we know that historically, scientific progress has been measured by its ability to construct reductive frameworks to classify and understand the natural world. We've tried to narrow it down to its parts without seeing how interlocked and interconnected things are. So, for instance, even like vitamins, some vitamins don't work well because they've been separated. Like you eat a fruit and eating the fruit is better for you than separating out and taking the vitamins individually, because it's the way it all functions together has value. So this one-size-fits-all schema that came to dominate our thinking in the 18th and 19th century doesn't suit us anymore. Instead of thinking about who has this role or who has that role and which one is more important, we need to think about the interconnectedness of roles. If this role fails, the system fails. And I think that our younger generations, we're seeing that they have these values of wanting a more interconnected world, of caring, and also of honoring the lessons that we can learn from these different kinds of species and these different kinds of systems. So I'm going to foray into even more remote territory for me. I have a humanities background, but in Hamlet says, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And this is Einstein's theory of general relativity, represented on the left, and quantum mechanics on the right. So general relativity has given us an understanding of the big picture of the cosmos and large bodies of mass and how they interact with one another. And quantum mechanics has given us an understanding of the microscopic world of atoms and particles. So these are two theories that we take to be true, but they're incompatible for them in terms of our human understanding or human explanations. And you can, apparently cell phones embody both kinds of technology. They have GPS, which is informed by general relativity, and they have microchips, which are little quantum mechanical machines. So interestingly, what's interesting to me is the incompatibility of these two theories and how we can't reconcile them, right? That humans observe these laws of physics, but they're also beholden to the physics. We're situated inside this world, and our view is from within its midst. So we think we're studying the world, right? There's more things in the heaven and earth that are dreamt of in our philosophy. We think we're studying the world, but in reality, we're making evident the limits of our own thinking. The truth is stranger, livelier, and more expansive than anything we can compute. So things are connected, but our brains can't always, they're not designed always to hold several thoughts at once. They're not built to understand the reality of the world. And in fact, our brains are built to discern simple patterns and tell simple stories to explain complex things. And our default mindset is to be reductive and myopic, right? Because it's energy efficient to simplify. So in those instances, we tend to make a choice and then employ all our biases, either our confirmation bias or our hindsight bias. We want to choose the one right thing. You either do it or you blow it. We don't think about what the possibilities might be. We don't think about what those different paths are. We think about picking the one. And anxiety can exacerbate that tendency to make the one right decision, or else it will be a failure. But over centuries, we've learned that we're not at the center of the universe, and that we've been more this decentering of us from Copernicus, and when we prove that Earth revolves around the sun, to telescopes that confirm that our Earth is only one planet among billions, learning about the microbiome, that we have more bacteria in our bodies and on our bodies than we have human cells, right? We're learning to recognize the nature of the real world of which we are a part. We're learning to acknowledge the grand web of interconnectedness, and being connected to each other means we have an impact. We're both only one of countless people, and everything that we do matters. So, here's the 20th century pathway to adulthood, right? Where we felt this was sort of the linear trajectory. You finished your education, got a job, left home, got married, had children. And there's an assumption that that was the path to success, to acceptability. And now we've seen a lot of those categories kind of blown up, right? What is finish your education going to look like in the next 20 or 30 years? What's higher education going to look like? It may look really different from the way it's looked now, and colleges and universities are really grappling with that. Get a job. What does work look like? We've seen it change really dramatically, even just in the last couple of years. Well, we hope that everybody still leaves home, but what does leaving home mean? What does it mean to go out on your own? What are the structures, that you will inhabit, literally? Marry, don't marry, what does marriage look like? Who gets to be married and have the privilege of getting married? Do people are waiting to get married later and later? Do you need to get married? What does that look like? What are the different configurations of family and couplehood? Chosen families, that's hear a lot about chosen families now, as well as families of origin. Have children, don't have children before you get married, never get married. I mean, there's so many different proliferations. And then there are pathways that aren't even represented by any of this, that could be, or represented in different orders, or in different imaginings, right? So we can't, again, when we think about the systems that we've relied upon to give us certainty, quote unquote, or security, like even this doesn't really exist anymore. So, Audre Lorde, poet, writer, has a quote: "Our children cannot dream unless they live. They cannot live unless they are nourished. And who else will feed them the real food without which their dreams will be no different from ours?" The syntax is a little convoluted in this quote, but I love that she's thinking about how our children will need to have different dreams from ours, that the dreams will have to be appropriate to the world that they're living in and they're inheriting. And it's incumbent upon us to honor that difference, even if we don't know what those dreams are and we might not be able to imagine them. We have to be alongside our children as they inherit that world and have to imagine for themselves. She's challenging the paradigms of what have come before, which are destroying us, our health, our spirits, and the planet. And we need to, I think, reckon with the climate change and the climate disruption that is part and parcel of the lives that we live in the world that our children will inherit, and their children. And that status may be changing to no longer what you do, but how you contribute to the world. So I think starting to think about and embrace those new worldviews is really important. So, purposeful learning. I did a little research on the etymology of learning, and interestingly, it comes from the word lois, which is to furrow and track, and it's also related to the German Gleis, which means track, and to Old English last, which means the sole of the foot. And actually, this is like trivial, but I think it's fascinating. The shoe last is the starting point of shoe design. And it's called the heart of the shoe. And shoemakers, it's the center of the shoemaking process. And when shoemakers make a shoe, they start with the last and build the shoe around the last. So learning is at the heart of movement, of tracking something that you don't know something about. You don't know what you're going to find as you forge that path. It's unpredictable, it's confounding, it's improvisational. And if you think about our ancestors tracking an antelope, or they only had the imprints. They didn't know where the animal was. They didn't know where they would find it, right? They had to be flexible. They had to be curious. And I love that that is in the root of learning. And related to that is the Latin word natura, which is itself a translation of the Greek word physis, which means growing and becoming. It's not about a standing body of knowledge. And so purposeful education is about understanding of the world as moving and emerging and growing. It's also an understanding of the world through moving, emerging, and growing, not necessarily about compliance, not solely about competition. So we may not know what the future looks like, but we do know the qualities that we need to cultivate in our children and ourselves, and a shift from the paradigms of the idealized individual of autonomy and independence to a collective collaboration and independent existence. So, I love this quote, "A Laboratory of Care and Wonder." It's by Ross Gay, who's a wonderful poet and essayist. And if school is a laboratory of care and wonder, what would be the qualities that would be, that would be intrinsic in it? Well, it would be intellectual engagement about what matters, opportunities for creativity, for curiosity, being known, belonging, which is belonging, and we talk a lot about belonging. What does it mean to belong? Well, one essential quality of belonging is witnessing and beholding each other through challenges, really being there for each other, knowing each other as well as we can, and helping them navigate different challenges. It's a safe place to risk. There's physical movement and the joy of our bodies and our physicality, space to discuss complexity of identities, and learning how to be responsible for those who are more vulnerable than you. That is a laboratory of care and wonder that I think is really beautiful. And to understand, who we are, we need to be in a laboratory of care and wonder together. So it's a place where we can get lost together. So we think together or try ideas out together, collaborate, work through thorny problems and questions, have good conversations, and permission to fail. We talk a lot about positive psychology at Turning Point. I think about it as a kind of inoculation against adversity, right? Positive psychology is not about rainbows and unicorns and everything's fine, that sort of toxic positivity that is so, that we're so aversive to, like that, no, it's inauthentic and it doesn't work. But the idea of chasing the process, focusing on strengths to combat and deal with our challenges, thinking about the whole, because when we focus on just that one specific outcome, we lose that bigger picture, that more holistic idea. We choose qualities to pursue and not a path, which is really different. Like we think about, choosing the qualities for a path as opposed to choosing a path that we want our child to go on, regardless of whether or not that path is right for the child. It might just be that we have a vision or a fantasy of what we want for our children, but honoring who our children are and the qualities that they have as we're thinking about what they need. This idea of flow, which is that immersion, that feeling of energized focus and involvement, the enjoyment in the process of the activity. And when we enter the state of flow as a result of an intentionally designed dynamic learning community, students can better select challenging goals, they perform better, and they persist longer on challenges. They can navigate difficult situations more resiliently and feel more confident sharing their authentic selves. And belonging, this idea that we need to productively disagree and struggle because our dreams are not always the same as others. So, we asked you, if you RSVP'd, to identify the elements that you found most that resonated most for you in terms of what you were hoping your child, with the skills and qualities that your child would grow and develop here at Turning Point, or in their lives. And so we have a little graph. So these were the you can see the most popular to the least popular, with us, of course, a small subset. This was just those of you who RSVP'd. And but we can see that confidence and critical thinking and kindness kind of at the top, and then followed by curiosity. Curiosity, by the way, requires vulnerability. You have to admit that you don't know something when you're curious about it, and that can be hard because we live in a culture where we're supposed to know things and not let other people know that we might not have it all together. So I love curiosity for that. Creativity, problem solving, gratitude, integrity, and then sort of empathy, motivation, friendship, and leadership. So those were the top 12. But interestingly, even though the table of elements are separate elements that come together in different, called positive equations for achievement for each child or each day or a lesson that teachers are teaching, even when you look at, I looked at where they all fell in the table of elements. There were a lot of intellectual and social and emotional, couple of ethical, but they're all interconnected. You can't have leadership without confidence or curiosity. You can't have critical thinking without motivation. You can't have leadership without accountability, for that matter, or advocacy. I mean, those are two that I might add as well: accountability, equity, advocacy. But they're all kind of interrelated, and they all inform each other. So I love that, a lot of what parents identified as important to them sort of resonate in some of the values and thinking that has informed this presentation tonight, which is how do we create opportunities for kids to develop their confidence, for them to hone their critical thinking skills, for them to develop kindness and curiosity, to be creative. It's not by narrowing down. It's not by saying we know what's best because when we went to school, it looked like this. And that's how I know it's a good school. It's a good school if schools are grappling with these questions like we are. And also, it's sort of in the bones of Turning Point. As Sam said, when I came here and we were able as a team really to think about what was special about the school and how could we represent it. The school has the ability to, it's not even to pivot or move toward these kinds of pedagogical and philosophical ideas. The school already does those things, which is why I think it's so special and is sort of ahead of its time in that way. Because schools that have done who are more traditional or who have not had to or not wanted to or has not been in their philosophy to be more collaborative, to be more creative, who have been more sort of traditional, expert in the front of the room and students memorizing bodies of knowledge. Like that's not going to work anymore. And even though I think all students are starting to shift, all schools are starting to shift, I do believe that we don't really have to shift because this is who the school is. Can we continue to get better? Are we always continuing to improve? Of course. We want to meet the times. We want to meet the needs of each child. But we are well equipped by the very nature of who the school is and has been, and the values and our philosophy and pedagogy. So I feel really, that's part of why this is exciting to me and not sort of overwhelming, right? We have a wonderful foundation for this work. So that's the 3,000-foot perch, just to help you understand what I'm thinking about as we enter this new and exciting and really critical watershed moment in the history of our planet, in the history of education. And as I said, the beauty of our school is that we already have these mindsets and dispositions. So I just want to share with you sort of how it translates into specific accomplishments, programs, projects, and approaches. So we're just going to go through a few more slides. So in terms of academic excellence and our intellectual pillar, we've been doing a lot of good work. So this is sort of the nitty-gritty, like how does this translate? Well, we've been really thinking about assessment and what it means to learn and how we measure it and how we communicate it to students and how we communicate it to families so that everybody is informed and has that ability to reflect and figure out how we leverage kids' strengths to take them to the next level, to make sure they're challenged appropriately. We've done We've looked at elementary and middle school progress reports and thinking and thought a lot about equitable grading that's accurate, as bias resistant as possible, and that promotes intrinsic motivation. We continue to refine DEI and anti-racist curricula, make sure those ideas, mindsets, the representations are in our curriculum. We've coordinated our reading and writing skills assessment and monitoring, and that may seem like, of course you do that, but most schools don't. Most schools have teachers who ad hoc do their own kind of assessing and then kids go up to the next level, and it's not coordinated and it's not communicated. And we are doing a really good job of making sure that kids are handed off and that their reading and writing skills smoothly transition between one class to the next. We have a lot of really wonderful new middle school electives as well that are reflecting teacher interests and the interests of students. So when students said, I want to do a science fair, Gabby and her team created an elective for a science fair. We have journalism now and poetry debate. A lot of those things have come from student interest, and they advocate for themselves and tell us what it is that they hope that we can provide for them, and then often we're able to do that. We've developed a scope and sequence for learning in the early childhood division and for social and emotional learning. We've really rethought a lot of our family at school day projects and presentations, and a lot of those are coming up in elementary, so I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And we continue to provide excellent professional development for our teachers, for teachers to feel that they are growing professionally and that they are getting what they need to be the very best teachers that they can be is really important, and we've always valued that and prioritized that for them. So in terms of well-being, we have a new school psychologist, Dr. Daisy Gomez, whom some of you may have met. So she's supporting the social, emotional, mental health of needs of students, supporting the faculty in meeting those needs, and has been wonderful. Raul Gonzalez, who's you met tonight, our new director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, leading this work of equity and belonging. And we continue to foster teamwork, ownership, and purpose in everyone's learning. And of course, all of our teachers shaping the lives of children every day, having that strong influence on their well-being. And we know that engaged students are more hopeful about the future, and that engagement and well-being are reciprocal, so that the well-being that we feel increases our ability to succeed even more than engagement. So they're building on each other in an upward trajectory. I want to talk a little bit about our restorative approach that we have to discipline and when students need support with conflict or with relationships with other children. So this is an approach that empowers students to resolve conflicts on their own and in small groups. We bring them together to talk, to air grievances, to try to find some common ground. And instead of judging students, punishing students, which we know doesn't work, even we know that as parents, we understand their behavior as part of normal development, and we address it appropriately. Does that mean anything goes? Does that mean kids can just continue to say, oh, I'm just a kid and this is part of my normal developmental progress? No, but it does mean that we are helping them to resolve conflict, and that we think it's more that taking ownership and accountability helps students to learn in that moment more than punishing. So does that mean that sometimes students have to spend a day or two at home to reflect and have some separation so that we can bring them back into the community in a restorative way? Yes, but does it mean that we're saying that they're shamed and that they don't belong here? No, it's a different approach, and again, one that may look different from the kind of discipline that we experienced when we were going through school. And so we do this definitely in the middle school, upper elementary. So if you have questions about that, and we'll probably do some more parent education about this approach, because it does, it's a different way of thinking about discipline, but we're not the only school that is moving in this direction. So Of course, just to remind us that when in a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community, students get to come to school as their fullest and most authentic version of themselves. And this is, what we know is that diversity, equity, inclusion is foundational to academic excellence, because the more diverse the learning environment, the more ideas, the more opportunities for collaboration, the more learning that happens. And so they're part and parcel. So DEI is not here over on the side. We don't have like a DEI lesson of the week. It's incorporated into everything that we do, from curriculum to discipline to advisory to all the different interactions and programming that we do at Turning Point. And as I said, diversity, being in diverse learning environments, makes us stronger, improves our cognitive thinking and our critical thinking and our problem solving. So we're pleased to have Raul here helping us navigate these issues and create an environment where everyone can learn. So here's some of the accomplishments. If you were here last year, you know that we did a climate survey, a climate and culture survey and analysis, and we asked families and faculty, staff to participate in this survey, and then we got some results. And so some of the accomplishments that we've been working on the last year include leveraging our DEI lens to continue to evaluate our curriculum. We're continuing ongoing educational opportunities for everyone to support engagement with diverse viewpoints and perspectives. And we want to cultivate empathy and deepen understanding and belonging. We've been doing affinity groups in the middle school. We've been doing faculty and staff trainings. We'll be doing a parent training in the spring, and Raul and I are going to start a kind of monthly office hour where we'll be available for people to drop in, have coffee, just chat with us or ask us any questions that you might have. We continue really intentional integration of student education around hurtful and hate speech. There's a lot of like, JK, or hey bro, I can't do this. I'm not a middle school student, but, like where they just say like, we're just kidding, or dude, I was just, you can't take a joke, or, you're so sensitive. Well, so thinking about how they see a lot of that. Somebody was asking me about social media. It's in the culture, this kind of, and kids in particular sometimes will talk to each other in a bantering way that can cross the line. And so helping them to understand boundaries, what's okay, what's not okay, what's never okay, is really important. We do that, sometimes we do that in the moment when those teaching opportunities come up, when there is a boundary that gets crossed, but mostly we also do it preemptively in advisory, in morning meetings, and Raul comes into classrooms and has conversations with the class about an issue or about how to be a good friend. So we're continuing our efforts to foster racially inclusive school and gender inclusive school. I mentioned we have affinity groups, and as we said, we want to make sure that when we're doing any kind of disciplinary actions, that we are being equitable in those, and that we're not letting biases or assumptions influence how we treat different kinds of students, depending on who they are, what their background is. So this is our beautiful mission statement, which we sort of released into the world maybe 2 years ago, 1 year ago. It's like during the end of the pandemic, so it's a blur. But that is to say, it hasn't circulated as much because it's still fairly new, and I love it. It's really hard to get a mission statement to be succinct and really represent who you are. There's like a sort of arms race of mission statements. If you want to go down the rabbit hole and you want to look at other schools' mission statements, and they're pages and pages long because everybody feels like, I have to include this, I have to include this. But we wanted to really get really sharp and crisp. And so we open our doors every day to create a dynamic learning community in which each child grows into their best self. And there's so much I love about this mission statement, the idea of it being dynamic, that movement that we were talking about. The learning is moving and growing and emerging, and that's reflected in dynamic. I love best self in each child, and the idea that we open our doors every day, the faculty and staff, teachers, we're here every day. We bring our best game to make sure that we are doing our best by your students, that we are continuing to innovate, that we are continuing to learn and grow and meet the needs of each child, understand what their individual positive equation is for achievement and success. I love community. I'm so glad you came out tonight, even if it's not the robust throngs that we were hoping for. We will get back to that place where I think we want to be together and feel good about being together. And we create it together. We co-create this environment. And so, as I said, I think we are well positioned for the future. We are an intentional, thoughtful, joyful community of learners. We'll continue to meet that moment. And I feel really lucky to be here. It's my 7th year at this school. I feel lucky to be at a school that was so well positioned to navigate the pandemic, to move into the future, to take care of the needs of our children, our families, to partner with all of you. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for being part of this community.